have worked tirelessly to protect women who have been abused or subject to all kinds of abuse, and young people too. When you hear something like this, does it worry you? Do you think, hang on, does it sort of spark something in your head, go, hang on, this isn't right? Or does it think, actually, that is part of the solution, maybe getting young people more in tune with our bodies and more, you know, and more used to nudity, to put it another way?
Yeah, I think it's a TV programme on Channel 4, and I'm not sure it's part of the particular solution to any of the stuff that I battle, nor is it problematic. When I saw it advertised, my husband said, Channel 4, they love naked TV programmes. Yeah, look, I think it's perfect. Teenagers are, I mean, if you look at the data around teenagers watching things like pornography, really often quite aggressive pornography, where people's bodies are all the same. I think that's where I'd want to focus my attention. I don't think that this is going to harm anybody doing this particularly, but neither do I think it's necessarily the solution. I think talking to young people on their level about the relationships they have is probably the answer.
Yeah. Let's talk about some very, very important issues that you are directly working on. Labour has pledged to introduce specialist rape courts to tackle what the party says is collapsing confidence from women in the justice system. It found rape survivors are waiting on average 3 years for their case to be heard, and the number of victims abandoning their case has doubled since 2015. I mean, do you see this as something that's long overdue, and why we haven't even got to this position before? And, I mean, it must be incredibly frustrating for you.
It is incredibly frustrating, and whilst it, you know, I do think it is long overdue. Actually, under the last Labour government, when I worked in frontline domestic and sexual violence services, we did have specialist courts, so it did used to exist. So it's actually been degraded. So I think that this is sort of a rehabilitation of the system. But there is other. I mean, there are other areas as well as fast tracking these rape cases that is important. It's important to make sure victims are supported throughout. But what we certainly didn't have under the last Labour government when I was working on the front line was this level of delay. And that is undoubtedly one of the major factors that has caused this massive increase since 2015 of victims dropping out of cases. I'm currently I work on lots and lots of different cases in my own constituency and around the country. But I'm currently handling a case of a girl who came forward when she was 13 about the abuses she'd suffered from the age of 10 to 13 as a child. And she's now 21 and still hasn't seen the inside of a courtroom, and her court date has been moved back, must be 5 or 6 times now.
Explanation for that? Is it to do with gathering evidence? I mean, that seems extraordinary.
Oh, yeah, but I'm afraid to say that is absolutely become routine for the vast majority of rape victims. For a start off, the charging takes ages, so that's the police element of it. So the investigation, and if we have a look at the Casey review from a couple of weeks ago, where that she's talking about, you know, sort of rape kits and evidence being kept in fridges alongside the sandwiches of police officers. What we haven't got is specialist rape and sexual violence police units in every single police force in the country. In fact, the Labour Party has called for that previously and the government voted against that. So what we need is that element to be sped up. And then at the point that a charge has been taken, which of course at the moment is only in 1.6% of cases that come forward, so 98.4% of cases are dropped. And then we're still seeing this dropout rate during this waiting process. The whole system is in total calamity. And I've seen nothing but buzzwords and claims of making this a priority from the government with no change on the horizon.
Jess Phillips, Dominic Raab announced a similar pilot, didn't he, I think, in sort of Newcastle, Leeds and Snaresbrook, specialist rape courts. And at the time, a legal expert labelled it as a gimmick. Would you say that it's a gimmick?
I would say it's a gimmick if it's a pilot. The government love to just like put on a little pilot on things that are known to work. Look, we have a specific problem at the moment. Now, this isn't necessarily to say that it needs to be happening forevermore, but what we have is the highest ever backlog in cases in our history. There are 62,000 cases awaiting trial. Now, to the Labour Party, it is totally unacceptable leaving rape victims waiting in a system that that is forcing them to drop out at a doubling rate. So, I think that everything that Dominic Raab does is a gimmick, because usually what it is a headline rather than the actual work that needs to be done. You can't just have the rape courts, and the Labour Party would never, ever suggest that. They would suggest that you need end-to-end legal and emotional support for a victim who goes through the system, like that I have to provide in my constituency, where I have weekly meetings to hold people in the system. That is just, it's the level of work needed to do that is vital. But Dominic Raab just wants to say, we're doing this one thing at Snaresbrook Crown Court, which, if you've ever been to Snaresbrook Crown Court, as I have, funnily enough, to a rape trial, it's looking very, very tired under Dominic Raab's rule.
Well, I haven't been there, so I can't comment on that. But you have in detail talked about the delay in terms of bringing evidence and the police delay, and also, obviously, there with the court delay, if you like, the legal process. I wonder then, when you woke up this morning and saw the news that the Met Police have announced officers from serious crime squads, including those cases that you're talking about, they have been moved to investigate internal standards, trying to clean up the force. It's a complicated one, isn't it? Because there's always a finite amount of money.
It is.
We know that we need to clean up the police force. The Met Commissioner has said we need to clean up the police force. And actually, some of those things that they want to get rid of feed back in to attitudes against violence against women. So,
yeah, it is. It's a balancing act, and it's a difficult job for Mark Rowley.
Is he right to do that then? Is that the right decision?
I mean, the operational decision that Mark Rowley takes is absolutely for him. I wouldn't ever assume that he hasn't done the proper risk assessments in the officers that he's taking off the particular duties to do this. But what I know is there is a crisis of confidence in, certainly in the Metropolitan Police, but actually in policing across the board. And the Labour Party have pledged that it would increase police confidence to its highest level. So, look, the problem is at the moment is that unless the Metropolitan Police clean up their act, and other police forces, I have to say, people won't come forward and people will drop out. I've handled a number of rape cases where specifically the stuff that has been happening in the Met has forced people to drop out. They didn't feel that they could trust the Metropolitan Police. So actually, you've got to get policing standards right, and I would push the Home Secretary very hard to make sure that's in every single force. This Mark Rowley isn't going to make West Midlands Police Force better. He isn't going to make Gwent Police Force better. The Home Secretary needs to look at standards in vetting and discipline of police officers across the border and do something about it.
Jess Phillips, can I ask? I mean, you've worked tirelessly, as we said before, on safeguarding and also the sexual exploitation of young girls, and defended victims and reminded us it's the victims that matter. What were your thoughts when Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, last weekend made a very, very clear statement? There was no caveats involved, saying that British Pakistani men do have an issue when it comes to English white girls. You sit in Birmingham, you work in this area, but also Birmingham is home to one of the biggest British Pakistani communities in the country. I was born in your constituency, Yardley. Lots of Pakistanis in that area.
You were?
What's your... How do you feel? At the same point, we know that there are issues, of course, but a whole community appears to be tarnished. What did you think of Suella Braverman's comments?
I thought that Suella Braverman's comments were stupid, and she was chasing headlines rather than dealing with the front line. So Suella Braverman successfully managed to make everybody talk about her comments rather than her failures in sexual exploitation. And if you read the independent child sexual abuse inquiry, which was done over, a decade of work, what that found is that sexual exploitation has increased in the last 10 years. In fact, it's worse than it has been before. And as I'm sure you've already reported, the Home Office found that there was grooming across every single community, and it pretty much reflects the populations as they are, rather than this particular focus that Suella Braverman wanted everybody to have. But that's because she doesn't want you to know that she's currently making victims of sexual exploitation wait for over 500 350 days to be told that they are victims, and that is a service that the Home Office runs currently. If you're a victim of sexual exploitation, you have to be approved by a Home Office system that Suella Braverman runs, and British girls are waiting up to 2 years to be told by Suella Braverman whether she believes if they're a victim or not. She didn't want to talk about that, so she always has to find somebody else to blame, and nobody likes to play culture wars like Suella Braverman, but it's not a surprise because she's delivering literally nothing on the ground and not helping anyone.
Jess Phillips, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding of the Labour Party. Thank you.
Talk to her.